word that in Section 4 of the 14th Amendment refers only to bonds and similar debt instruments. It does not include statutory obligations. The first thing I want to talk about is the debt limit. The debt limit is the total amount of money that the United States government is authorized to borrow to meet its existing legal obligations, including Social Security and Medicare benefits, military salaries, interest on the national debt, tax refunds, and other payments. The debt limit does not authorize new spending commitments. It simply allows the government to finance existing legal obligations that Congress and presidents of both parties have made in the past. Here, I want to talk about the origin of the debt limit. It started with a war. In the early decades of the Republic, Congress preferred to issue debt for specific purposes, such as issuing bonds to build the Panama Canal. During the Spanish-American War of 1898, Congress authorized the Treasury Secretary to issue short-term debt and some longer-term debt with specific limit on maturities. But World War One was a conflict with unknowable costs, making targeted legislation difficult. At first, Congress established a 5 billion limit on new issues of bonds, along with the immediate issuance of 2 billion in one-year certificates. But very quickly, another law was needed, the Second Liberty Bond Act of 1917, in which Congress set a general limit on borrowing, 9.5 billion in Treasury bonds and 4 billion in one-year certificates. This freed the Treasury Secretary to begin to figure out the best mix of securities to issue without nearly as much congressional oversight as before. By the end of World War One, the limit on Treasury obligations had been raised to 43 billion, which was considerably more than the 25 billion in outstanding public debt in 1919. For decades, future increases of the national debt were simply amendments to the Second Liberty Bond Act, but it was not in 1939, on the eve of the World War II, that Congress eliminated all of the different limits on types of bonds, thus creating an overall aggregate limit on the national debt. Now, I want to talk about the law related to the debt limit. Under Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, Congress has the power to borrow money on the credit of the United States. This power is exclusive. It cannot be exercised by the other branches of government. If Congress refuses to raise the debt ceiling, the President has no authority to go around the legislative because he thinks raising the ceiling is desirable. Such an act would violate the Constitution's separation of powers. The President can no more authorize additional borrowing than he can impose new taxes, regulate commerce, or exercise any other power granted only to Congress. Everybody must want to know how did the debt get so large. First, the debt is an accumulation of federal budget deficits. Therefore, the best way to look at how the debt got so large is to compare the budget deficit by president. President Obama added the economic stimulus package, the Obama tax cuts, and roughly 800 billion a year in military spending. The national debt grew rapidly even before the 2008 financial crisis. Between 2000 to 2007, it ballooned from 6 to 9 trillion, a 50 increase. the 700 billion bailout expanded it to 10.5 trillion by December 2008. President Reagan cut taxes, increased defense spending, and expanded Medicare. All of these presidents also suffered from low tax receipts resulting from recessions. Second, the federal government couldn't keep running up deficit if interest rates skyrocket like they did with Greece. Why have interest rates remained low? Purchasers of Treasury bills still reasonably expect that the US will pay them back. For foreign investors, the US is such a large customer, it's allowed to run a huge tap, so it will keep buying exports. Those countries maintain large holdings of treasury to keep their currencies low relative to the dollar. They keep buying more treasuries. During the recession, foreign countries increased their holding of treasury bonds as a safe haven, which kept US interest rates low. This holding went from 13% in 1988 to 31% in 2011. Furthermore, anticipation of the power demand puts downward pressure on the dollar. That's because dollars and dollar-denominated treasury securities may become less desirable, so their value declines. As dollar declines, foreign holders get paid back in currency that's worth less, which further decreases demand. The United States has not always operated with such a large debt. After financing World War II with substantial borrowing, the outstanding debt held pretty stable for the next 25 years, going up to 283 billion in 1970 from 242 billion in 1946. Because of the reasons I talked about, the debt has been growing substantially. In 2003, for instance, the government paid about 150 billion in interest costs. This year it is estimated to be upward of 200 billion. These interest payments are taking up more federal spending now than federal outlays on education, transportation, and housing, and urban development combined. Though the interest costs are substantial, they have remained lower than some economists predict because the world has continued to lend money to the United States at very low interest rates, even as the nation's debt has grown. Here, I'm going to introduce the history about the debt limit. Congress has always acted when called upon to raise the debt limit. Since 1960, Congress has acted 78 separate times to permanently raise, temporarily extend, or revise the definition of the debt limit, 49 times under Republican presidents and 29 times under Democrat presidents. Congress usually raises the ceiling to prevent the negative consequences of a debt default. Congressional leaders in both parties have recognized that this is necessary. Technically, a default has happened in the history already. In 1979, as Congress was considering raising the debt limit, negotiations ran down to the wire. The Treasury Department had what it called technically glitches, and it was late paying a relatively small number of its Treasury notes. This amounted to a technical default, not a permanent one, because the note holders were eventually paid in full. So, what could a default mean for the economy? It could be bad on several levels. A default is typically a decision not to pay government bondholders back, in part or in full, but the rating agencies have said they might consider the United States in default if it fails to pay other creditors like government vendors, if the federal government interrupts payments, whether to Social Security recipients or contractors. Those people will then have less money to spend, and the economy will slow down. And if the United States defaults on its debt, there is a risk that the investors could demand a higher interest rate. Then, customers could also feel the pinch. Because the interest rates paid by corporations and customers in the United States are tied to the rate of the nation pays, interest rates could go up for everything from credit cards to mortgages. A homeowner with a mortgage for 100,000 might see her annual mortgage cost goes up by $100 to $200 a year. Economics says. And that's all.